I'm Scott Spivey. I'm with the Mississippi Home Corporation. I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of background. Trey gave it to you from kind of the office of the governor and how everything came about there. I'm going to give it to you from the Mississippi Home Corporation's perspective. Not all of you may be familiar with the Mississippi Home Corporation. We were created by a legislative act in the early 90s to provide affordable housing for the state of Mississippi. We have sister agencies in every state. Sometimes there's more than one. Mississippi, it's just us. We work out of our office in Jackson. We're given the authority to issue tax-exempt bonds to help fund affordable housing, mortgages through several programs. But the other program that we're in charge of is the Housing Tax Credit Program. And that was where we really found a lot of collaboration with the governor's office on the healthcare zone. If you know Trey, you know he is a true believer when it comes to all this, and he has an infectious enthusiasm when it comes to talking about the healthcare zone initiatives, and that carried over into our office. Every year, the thing that governs the tax credit program is a qualified allocation plan. That has to be signed off on by the governor. And we presented our QAP first draft to the governor in late 2012, and that was the first time we started hearing from that office about, okay, we'd like to see some things in the 2013 QAP. As discussions kind of continued and we started to talk about timelines, the typical timeline for tax credit development is about 24 months. Well, you heard the governor talk today at lunch. He likes to do things fast. He likes to get that window of opportunity there. So the challenge then became, well, how do we speed that up a little bit? And the idea came about that there were a large pool of applications that barely missed funding in the previous round. They were still viable, and they could demonstrate that continued viability by updating some things. And that would really cut about 8 to 12 months out of the development process. A special round was created with the governor's office, and this is what we ended up doing in early 2013. You can see we got 19 developments funded for over 1,000 units, $131 million in total investment, about $17.3 million in construction wages. And I think that's a perfect example of the governor's office using a tool, using an agency like the Mississippi Home Corporation in an innovative way, and the Home Corporation responding to that challenge and kind of stepping up to the plate. The other advantage, and Trey talked about this as well, is that we ended up, by going back and grabbing some of those developments, we ended up going into a lot of areas where we don't typically go. That it's a little bit more difficult to get tax credit development. You're going to hear from some of the mayors in some of those areas, and you're going to hear about how tax credit developments, for several reasons that we'll get into in a minute, are really powerful community building tools. And not just from the total investment, the $131 million that we talked about, or the wages, but you're really looking at something that's going to, through either rehabilitation or new construction, or whether it be single family or multifamily, can really serve as anchors to local communities and provide that workforce housing. So what we'll talk about now is some of the specifics of the program. The Housing Tax Credit Program serves folks that make 60% or less of the area median income, are the people that are eligible for housing. What happens is developers apply for a reduction in federal tax liability based on the kind of the numbers in the development. That's how they can kind of determine how many credits they're eligible for. They sell those in a secondary market. So again, the tax credit program is a great example of a public-private partnership. They sell those to investors and then they use that to fund the development shortfall because they're not allowed to charge over a certain amount in rent. So it's a gap funding program. You can see this this slide kind of talks about some of the versatility that you get with the program. You can do new construction, rehab, the low income occupancy. You see the 20 and 40% numbers there. Developers almost always chase the points when it comes to an application. And if you heard the governor talk at lunch today, he was talking about how we put 15 points in a qualified allocation plan. Developments get funded or not funded based on 1 point. So, the healthcare zone is certainly a motivator. And again, low income occupancy, a lot of people, will always go for 100% low income occupancy because they get more points that way. Affordability requirements, this is where I was kind of mentioning where it becomes an anchor for communities. They have to remain affordable for 30 years. They enter into a minimum 15-year compliance period with us. There's also a compliance that they have to do with their investors who bought their credits. And that makes sure that we don't have what used to happen with older developments where they would come in, they would get built using government program, and then folks would take the money and run. And then you end up with dilapidated housing that's not doing anybody any good. The nice thing about this program is that we as Mississippi Home Corporation have an entire division that's based on compliance. File compliance, physical compliance. We do inspections down to, did they cut the grass? Did they put the batteries in the smoke detectors? And we really hold those property managers' feet to the fire with, different penalties to make sure that this housing is affordable housing, but it's also quality housing because and that's an advantage for the residents. That's an advantage for the communities that they serve. Priorities. This is one of the things that we did when we worked with the governor's office, and this is probably, I would say, one of the closest collaborations we've had with the governor's office with this administration. We're able to set these priorities every year, and that allows us to be very nimble in the administration of the program. So we can focus on things like rehabilitation. We can focus on the rehabilitation of Section 515 rural development properties. There's your 15-year compliance. And the healthcare zone was a perfect example of a priority that was brought to us, and that's going to be something that we stick with, and that's going to be something that changes. As this program, as this blueprint gets carried out, there will be other priorities for affordable housing. These are some of the developments I wanted to show you guys. This is Parkway Place in Greenwood. This is a single-family detached tax credit development that was placed in service in '08. That's a great example of some of the lease purchase housing that we're able to do. Hallmark Gardens here in Jackson is another. This was an acquisition rehab. If you had seen the old Hallmark Gardens, the contrast would be stark. Another good example here, you can see where it says amenities and services. The awards process through the qualified allocation plan also allows us to ask developers or require developers to offer services to their tenants. Those can be anything from after-school care, GED and workforce programs, drug and alcohol counseling, family counseling, computer centers, homework help for kids. A lot of the developments like Hallmark and others that get rehabilitated, you see a marked decrease in calls to the police, residents problems. They really do, come in and help fix it. We have some great developer partners that around the state that are dedicated to providing quality housing for their residents. These are just a couple more, some duplexes and some multifamilies in Waveland and Rosedale. I wanted to keep it brief. So in closing, I just wanted to point out that the tax credit program specifically really serves to support the goals of the healthcare zone initiative by being nimble and being able to meet the policy requirements that we hear from the governor's office while still meeting affordable housing goals around the state. And I think it's a powerful tool, and I think it's a good example of what happens when you've got your executive branch of government, you've got local governments, and you've got state agencies and quasi-state agencies like us all working together to toe the same line and work together to solve the problem, because this housing is going to complement the healthcare zone initiative by providing workforce housing in the areas that they're trying to build up economically. Quality housing is all about quality neighborhoods and quality communities, and that goes directly to the idea of quality of life being attractive to attract business to your area. And we think that the developments that we fund through the tax credit program end up being those kind of assets to the communities that help draw attention. So thank you for your time.